Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and this is another historic church in Nottinghamshire. This is the church of St Giles, Costock. The first church built here was probably around about 1080 AD, so towards the end of the 11th century, relatively early in the period after the Norman conquest of England. That church was completely demolished in the middle of the 14th century and replaced with, well, what is now the nave and chancel of the present building, probably on the original foundations. In the 19th century, a north aisle was added. Like so many rural churches, its small building has grown with its village. Costock now has spread quite a bit, but with the increasing secularism of the 20th century, that has not been reflected in the church the way that the 19th century population increase was. As we look around, we'll see some relics of old times. We shall see old medieval bench ends and such like. So let's take a look around. We start as usual at the west end, and you can see here some old bench ends. Some of these are medieval, some of them are probably later. Some of the pews at the back have been removed to make way for a small sink and open area. The seating here is predominantly in medieval style benches. So you have, for example, this dog face. You've got here somewhat grotesque angel with a book, and these are probably copies rather than anything else of medieval bench ends. In the Middle Ages, people like to have a bit of fun with their design, their architecture. It's something, of course, that, and the decoration particularly, something that post-medieval people get a bit, well, some Victorian get a bit upset about that kind of thing, but we like it. Nice big chunky medieval font. It's hard to tell what the date is simply because it is so plain, but the font is probably 14th century. It's in 1848 that the church is extended by the Reverend Edward Wilson, who adds this south aisle, sorry, this north aisle. Get me figure right. The seating is quite interesting because, as you can see, although it's 19th century, it's following the medieval benches. Now, medieval benches originally had no backs. Backs are put in later. You're expected to sit up straight, and if you don't, well, you fall over and people mock you. Here we have the restoration of St. Peter, Feed My Lambs, and there's the board with all the rectors going back to 1268. One thing I want to look on at these is what happens around 1662, and we find that Gabriel Wyersdale is recorded as being the rector in, being instituted in 1639, and then 1672 Thomas Townsend. So you don't have an obvious ejection here. We have here St. Luke and St. Elizabeth, and then we have St. George, St. Michael, and Christ. This is, of course, your war memorial window. We have here the war memorial of the Second World War. And again, the area here has been opened up as a sort of children's corner, and we have some of these benches. That's an old communion table, I would suspect, although the top may have been renewed. And there we are. They've got a sort of boxed, well, a sort of an actual boxed vestry at the back there, and see there's a nice crisp carving which tells us this is Victorian face up there. But the main body of the church is from the 14th century. The font is quite plain and ordinary and straightforward. And we have here, you can see this boxed in pew. Effectively, it's a smarter pew, I expect, for the Manor family. Reading desk, therefore, is inside the chancel. And we've got a beautiful little example here of one of these smaller organs of the Positive Organ Company. They're very distinctive. This case, they were, pun intended, and this organ, the casing is fairly basic, so you can see the pipes, which is always great fun when they play them, but you need someone who actually knows how to play the organ, otherwise you might make a bit of a mess, a bit of a noise. So we have here a nice big window, well, not so large, and then the east window, typical crucifixion. This memorial here is very beautiful. It's a memorial to the Reverend Sampson Parkins, LLD, rector of Keyworth and this parish, and son of Sir Thomas Parkins, Baronet of Bunny Park. He died September the 5th, and MD CCCI, of course, is 1801, aged 32. The bunnies were a bit eccentric, some of them. I mean, and the most famous of them was a wrestler, an amateur wrestler, and a baronet. We have a nice piscina there, and you can see that this bench here has been made out of medieval bench ends. Mother's Union banner up there. So the slow turnaround here, and you've got this lovely view west. It's a small church, it's a simple church, it's the sort of building that a lot of people these days, a lot of congregations these days look at it and go, yes, we're so glad we didn't have a massive rebuild in the 19th century. Now, as we proceed west down the nave, we pass the low side window here. I've mentioned them before, and some older guidebooks will describe them as the leper's window. They're not. The low side window is, we're not quite sure what it's for. The predominant theory at the moment is that in the Mass, during the Mass, someone would sort of ring a bell out the window to tell people the Mass was being said. At the elevation of the host, which is the important thing in the Mass. So here we proceed westwards, and we have here memorials rather quite severely, actually. Warns, we can't actually see much of what it says for, but it just tells us that the individual was from Kingston upon Soar. So, and here we are right at the back again. So this is the inside here at St Giles, Costock. We'll go outside next. Actually, before we go outside, we have here, you can just see in the window, this is the capital of a Norman column, and this is one of the reasons we know that there definitely was a Norman church here, because that's part of it. It's found in the churchyard in 1978. And so here we are outside at Costock. You can see behind me how simple the building is, just the nave and the chancel, and this porch has been added later. And until the 19th century, it didn't even have a belfry. It just had a sort of box in the west window with a bell in it. It worked, I suppose. 19th century, you get this idea, well, we have to beautify the building and make it a bit more special looking, and that this box thing looks a bit weird, so they replaced it with the modern belfry on the end of the north aisle. So let's have a look around the outside. There's some interesting features, particularly, of course, in the old building. So let's go. Yes. So here we go, and you can see there the north aisle has been added. Now what we'll do actually is we'll go around the south side first, and the reason for that will become quite evident very quickly. Porch is Victorian. The gates bear the date 1977, so that is the silver jubilee of the late Queen Elizabeth II. We have a family vault here. Family tombs. Can we see whose they are? No, they're all too eroded. And also rather eroded is this 14th century tomb recess on the outside of the chancel. We do have an effigy, also very eroded, and those marks inside, people have sharpened arrows there. Back in the Middle Ages it was, well, people would practice with their archery often in the churchyard. You can see here that low side window. That is the tomb recess. It was, in fact, it was the law in the 14th century that that all men who could had to practice with the bow. At one point, the king outlawed every other sport because, you see, archery has a very obvious application in war. England won several battles against the French, and after all, isn't that the best kind of battle to win? Certainly, I joke, it's the kind of battle that they wanted to win back then, because of the superior archery skills. So he said we need as many archers as possible. You see how small this is. It's a great example of one of these smaller medieval churches. As we go around to the north side, of course, we come across the bit that is most recent. There we are. The aisle, which is almost as big as the nave. And this is simply because we need much more in the way of accommodation, of seating for the congregation during services. So that is the outside. And as we had that wonderful 14th century tomb recess, we have essentially a pastiche of it here on the north side, which I think is rather fun. It's unfinished, sadly, and you can see immediately it's unfinished because look at those whacking great bits of stone. Those were supposed to be carved out. You can see above too. They're supposed to be carved out into these beautiful floral patterns. They never were, and it's a memorial to Edward Wilson. Of course, it's the vicar who has a building, who has this added, and died March 27th, 1859, aged 57 years. It's a shame it was never finished because it would have been very, very nice. It's very nice, it is, but it should have been finished. And we have here the north door. Again, not because north doors are really important by this point, but because you might as well. So that is the outside here at Costock. So St Giles, Costock. As I've noted before, church dedicated to St Giles are often found in remote places, and the size of the building here suggests that Costock was indeed a small place and a remote, isolated place in the wilds of Nottinghamshire at the time that the church was built. So thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you until next time.